Good morning, everybody. This is a live extreme weather briefing, and we have a lot to discuss from the short range all the way through the long range. It looks like the southern plains are really going to get active here over the coming days. This is the target area for Wednesday, actually, when it looks like there's some extreme cape that's going to advect north. Just east of the dry line that's located over the southern high plains. We've also got a Colorado low that's firing across southeastern Colorado at about 995 millibars. That's going to be a pretty semi-permanent feature over the coming days over the long range. Today we've also got a severe weather threat across the central and southern Texas Panhandle. Same goes for Tuesday afternoon. I'm going to break down the next few days as well. But many of the eyes are on Wednesday when that moisture really makes it to the dry line, and we could have a significant severe weather day on Wednesday, despite some modest mid and upper level flow on Wednesday over top the dry line. I've seen tornadoes with relatively weak 500 millibar flow and above, slow moving supercells, and you have plenty of low level shear for those storms to really get intense. Really all you need is for the rain and hail to be advected out of the updraft to have a sustained supercell, and you also need unimpeded inflow, of course, a strongly sheared environment for that supercell to develop tornado potential. Though the low level shear is extremely important, but it looks like the long range, the dry line, is going to light up day after day moving forward, starting on Wednesday. And even today, later on today and Tuesday, which will be tomorrow, I think the Texas Panhandle is also going to be active. But this is the target area on Wednesday. Some of the NAM model runs have showed a little bit less moisture further north across western Kansas, basically a ribbon of dew points continuing off to the north, but then it shows a west to east boundary separating deeper moisture to the south from the less moisture off to the north. That boundary is likely going to be reinforced by overnight convection, or MCSs, that will evolve overnight and send a dry line into the southern plains or send an outflow boundary down through the southern plains that will intersect with the dry line and definitely help to increase the coverage where that outflow boundary intersects with that dry line. But it's just too early to tell exactly where those complexes of storms are going to set up. There's going to be one developing tonight as well across the Texas Panhandle, and that's why the Storm Prediction Center has a slight risk across the southern high plains and eastern New Mexico. And there also is a west to east oriented frontal boundary that's going to be in place, separating stable air off to the north from the unstable air off to the south. The thermodynamic environment is going to be a little bit marginal. These are going to be some high base storms. Dew points are about 50, maybe a 51, 52 in there coming in to the southern portion of that risk. And with temperatures in the upper 70s to near 80, that's going to create pretty high cloud bases. But I do expect widespread severe weather to develop along the dry line and in the vicinity of this boundary, west to east oriented differential heating and moisture boundary that will be in place across the Texas Panhandle. But these storms here are going to leave behind an outflow boundary tonight that is going to serve for the focus of additional supercell development tomorrow afternoon. It looks like that's going to be centered somewhere across the central Texas Panhandle on Tuesday afternoon. That's going to develop another complex of storms Tuesday night, and then that will set out an outflow boundary, or reinforce basically a moisture gradient or differential heating boundary somewhere across western Oklahoma or western Kansas for Wednesday afternoon that will intersect with that dry line and locally enhance the development of supercell storms where that outflow boundary intersects the dry line. But overall, there's a surface low that's going to develop to the lee of the Rockies, and then as we get close to sunset, just to the east of the dry line, that low-level jet will ramp up every single day, 30, 40 knots as we get close to sunset, and also just after sunset, and that'll provide more than ample low-level shear to develop a tornado threat. There's going to be supercells, very large hail, strong damaging winds, and tornadoes starting Wednesday on. But first, let's look really quickly at today. This is the WRAP forecast for 22Z, which is 5 p.m. for the Texas Panhandle. I love using the WRAP for the high plains. And here you can see that differential heating boundary that we were talking about. To the north of it is going to be quite stable. Cloudiness, stratus clouds. To the south of it, it's going to heat up and be well mixed with a lot of southerly winds from the surface through the low levels of the atmosphere. Right near this boundary, though, the winds will be a little bit more southeasterly, so some of the models are showing some enhanced low-level shear here, but I'm just not sure that the thermodynamics are going to line up. You're probably going to have a lot of colliding storms The wrap does have a storm down near Hereford, well southwest of Amarillo, where you do get a little bit of an enhancement of some low-level shear. There certainly is a non-zero tornado threat down here. I could see maybe a tornado report or two across the western Texas Panhandle in the vicinity of this surface boundary. I can now show you the storm relative helicity here, and it shows you how that low-level shear is enhanced also along that differential heating boundary. These setups are pretty common across the Texas Panhandle, where you get this west to east oriented boundary. You get a dry line across eastern New Mexico. Supercells develop along that dry line, evolve along the surface front, and sometimes you can get tornadoes with these as well. Today though, the day before the day, the moisture is a little bit more limited than tomorrow, and especially Wednesday, with those dew points near 50 to low 50s. Dew point spreads are going to be about 27 degrees between the temperature and that dew point. You really want to keep those dew point spreads down to about 20 degrees or less. You can also see supercells developing along the dry line throughout eastern New Mexico. Could easily get a scattered mothership or two out there. And there is a jet streak, a 500 millibar jet streak with 35 knot flow that's going to be coming in across this region. That will lead to some transient supercell structures at least, maybe even some long-lived supercells as well. But the limiting factor today is really going to be that moisture. You're really going to need about a 55 dew point in the Texas Panhandle to get a substantial tornado threat. Lubbock is coming in at about a 49 degree dew point. You're starting to get some 50s though into southeastern New Mexico, streaming up just to the east of that dry line. You do have some stratus clouds here across far eastern New Mexico. And then to the north of that, you're starting to see that surface front already set up. These winds are going to shift to more of a southerly direction as you're going to mix down the southerly winds from just above the ground down to the surface. That will cause these winds to veer just a bit. These winds are going to remain out of the east-southeast to the north of that boundary. Right now, temperatures are in the low, or dew point temperatures are in the low to mid 40s up there. They're going to remain steady. But moisture advection is going to continue across southwest Texas into the southern Texas Panhandle. You've got a 57 down here. You've got mid 50s streaming north. You've even got a 60 just north of the Big Bend, Del Rio, 73 over 63. So you have major moisture transport coming in here through the Rio Grande Valley. The dry line is going to advect a little bit to the east and set up across eastern New Mexico. This surface front is also going to continue here. I do expect a supercell to develop where that surface front meets up with the dry line. If I were targeting an area today, storm chasing wise, I would target this vicinity, maybe a little bit west into eastern New Mexico here, maybe near Clovis. I do believe that the west central Texas Panhandle into eastern New Mexico, in the vicinity of this surface front, there's probably going to be a narrow window where there's surface-based instability, southeasterly winds, pooling of moisture maybe just to the south of that surface front. And I was just talking to Blake Brown, who lives out there in the Texas Panhandle. He said it's been so dry to the south of Amarillo down to the Lubbock area that he wouldn't be surprised to see a mega haboob form, or a big-time dust storm is going to surge off to the east-southeast across the target area, maybe impacting the Lubbock area. So don't be surprised if you see a couple haboobs or some incredible videos of those haboobs later on today. This is the forecast 500 millibar winds for Wednesday. Let's jump forward just a little bit here. And one thing that you're going to see is consistent probably through the end of May, maybe even through June, is you're going to see this southwesterly mid and upper level flow just continuing across the U.S. Usually when you see this, there's a little bit of cyclonic curvature with it as well. It leads to Lee cyclogenesis to the east of the Rocky Mountains, the formation of Colorado lows. The pressure falls to the west over the higher terrain lead to the formation of a low-level jet across the southern plains, and you get a dry line that sloshes back and forth. It'll slosh back to the west, slosh back to the east, and go back and forth like that. The moist air off to the east will slosh upstream, and it's much shallower as you get closer to the dry line surface boundary, and then the moisture gets deeper as you go further off to the east. It's almost like an inertial oscillation of that moisture, like a wave. In the evening, the dry line will slosh back to the west, and then during the afternoon, the next day, late morning into the early afternoon, it marches off to the east, and that's as the winds are strongest back behind the dry line, those southwesterlies, as those 700 millibar winds are mixed down to the surface in a well-mixed boundary to the west of the dry line. But overall at 500 millibars, you can see general southwest flow in the mid and upper levels across the plains, and that usually sets the stage for significant severe weather multiple days in a row. And of course, I'm going to be out there storm chasing every day, probably starting tomorrow in the Texas Panhandle and then every day thereafter. But southwesterly winds at the mid and upper levels across the western U.S. Here you can see a more substantial system that certainly could be a player a little bit later down the road. As I mentioned, those pressure falls over the higher terrain accelerate a low-level jet. You have low pressure to the west, higher pressure off to the east, and that pressure gradient creates southerly winds about 1 kilometer above the ground here across Tornado Alley. And that's as you get pressure falls to the west and you have higher pressure to the east. Here you can see this ridge of high pressure centered over the southeast. It's going to be a nice day over the southeastern U.S. But that squeeze play in the lowest kilometer accelerates the low-level jet just above the ground. Southerly winds between it. Your dry line will slosh back and forth with the diurnal cycle. Supercells going off that dry line in the late afternoon through the evening hours, moving into this low-level jet, which creates enough low-level shear to cause these supercells to produce tornadoes. And one thing that's going to be common with these is a lot of CAPE. We're getting into the peak of the storm season. Ton of CAPE in excess of 3,000. This is the GFS forecast. The NAM has a lack of instability off to the north, but it has huge instability from basically southwestern Kansas through western Oklahoma. This is the triple point right here with a cold front to the north, a dry line extending to the south of that triple point, low-level jet streaming to the north to the east of it, creating that low-level shear. And a lot of CAPE is going to be in place to the east of that dry line, certainly. And I'm going to give you a much closer look now at the models. Let's dig down a little bit deeper at the HRRR over the next few days. And this is on the Pivotal Weather website, an incredible website to analyze model data. Good friends of mine from the storm chasing days. They don't storm chase as much anymore. Now they're just focused on making these incredible forecast model graphics. But this is this evening at 0Z, which is 7 p.m. Central Time. 0Z is Greenwich Mean Time out there. And this is 500 millibars, the mid-levels of the atmosphere. And here you can see the jet streak, which is going to be responsible for firing these storms. A little bit of cyclonic curvature associated with that jet streak. That's going to initiate storms first across eastern New Mexico, and then across the western Texas Panhandle as you get closer to evening. And there is a non-zero chance of a tornado, but I do think that the moisture is just going to be a little bit marginal. This is the HRRR, and you can see the dew points are going to be about 51 to 52 degrees. The temperature is going to be about 77 degrees. Upper 70s to around 80. That's going to create near 30-degree dew point spreads. This moisture here in the western Texas Panhandle is associated with rain-cooled air, some moisture from precipitation. So really, if you want to look for a forecast sounding, you want to look for one out ahead of that. And here's the 0 to 3 kilometer energy helicity index. We'll pick one of those streamers there. And here you can see the dew point of 52, temperature 78, creating what we call an inverted V low-level sounding. It's a very dry sounding there with the dew points and the green line. The red line is the temperature. Dew point spreads about 27 degrees. Still, though, you can get an isolated noodle, a tornado, probably not condensed all the way to the ground, but you can get tornadoes of this type of an environment in the western Texas Panhandle with those dew points near 50 to the low 50s. And here you can see the hodograph, quite a bit of shear, a lot of turning as well in that hodograph. So if the moisture was probably about 55 or higher, this would definitely be a tornado sounding. Plenty of mid and upper level winds, 30 to 40 knots there. But look at the lowest kilometer over to the east. Those are those southeasterlies that are in the vicinity of that differential heating boundary. That really elongates the hodograph with the area underneath the hodograph curve and the storm motion vector here, proportional to that storm relative helicity that we see so much. In this case, your storm relative helicity in this sounding 0 to 1 kilometer SRH. This says storm relative helicity of not very much in the lowest kilometer. About 150. But the issue today is definitely going to be these inverted V soundings. So wherever you pick a sounding in that warm sector, you can see this temperature is 82 degrees. These are 30-degree dew point spreads. There's going to be a lot of evaporational cooling below the cloud base with these inverted V soundings, and that's why we think that there's probably going to be a good chance of a haboob forming with a large-scale outflow kicking up dust. There's been a relative minimum in the rainfall across the southern Texas Panhandle, but this is a pretty favorable hodograph for some transient high-base supercell structures producing very large hail as well. There is also a bit of a 700 millibar speed max, which is shown to be important across the Texas Panhandle. You've got some winds 30, 35 knots. This is probably associated with outflow back behind those storms. You can see here that at about 22Z, you've probably got 25 to 30 knots at 700 millibars. This is north of that differential heating boundary there. With a bit of an increase I do want to show you guys tomorrow as well. Here's tomorrow evening. And even though there's no risk in the Storm Prediction Center, there's going to be a day of moisture return. The HRRR is showing some widely scattered supercell storms across the eastern Texas Panhandle. Looking at the moisture, it is a little bit higher. You've got dew points of about 60 here in the eastern Texas Panhandle, which is more than sufficient for a tornado threat. This is Tuesday evening again, 6 p.m. Supercells are going to initiate along the dry line, probably pretty close to the Amarillo area. There's likely going to be an outflow boundary, or a couple outflow boundaries here, left behind by the complex of storms that's going to create tonight that we were just discussing. But this is a textbook Panhandle day. Looking at the mid-level winds at 500, you got 35 to 40 knots out of the west. A little jet streak coming in here. So notice how as we get closer to the event over the dry line, you always seem to have some decent mid-level flow across the Texas Panhandle into western Kansas every day, including Wednesday as you get a surge of moisture Tuesday night with a big low-level jet developing. But there's also going to be a complex of storms Tuesday night that's going to evolve across this region from these supercell storms as they congeal together and move east. There could be some storms in eastern Colorado as well tomorrow afternoon. I'm sure the Colorado storm chasers will be mobilized and going after this. Low-level jet increases a bit also tomorrow evening. This is near 0Z at about 7 p.m. See how the winds a kilometer above the ground increase above 30 knots? That's that low-level jet, even though we're pretty high elevation out there. The low-level jet's probably between 850 and 700 millibars, but you can certainly see the hint at it here in the central Texas Panhandle, increasing above 30 knots out there. Just for giggles, we can look at the sounding and notice how this becomes a tornado sounding now based on the archives because of the jump of dew points into the 60s by tomorrow afternoon. Hodograph doesn't look as favorable as it does today in the west central Texas Panhandle, but that jump in 10 to 15 degrees in dew point is going to make all the difference in bringing those cloud bases down. So I do think there's a decent chance of a tornado threat tomorrow afternoon and evening, a bigger chance on Wednesday afternoon and evening. We can now start looking at the long range here. I want to zoom out just a bit. We'll look at the GFS and then we'll look at the Euro. Well, look at this large-scale southwest flow across the western U.S. Stand by here. Trying to get my internet back. There we go. So notice the broad southwesterly flow that you see here across the western U.S. That's really what you look for this time of year for active severe weather. That's what the long range is looking for, this west to southwesterly flow, a ridge over the southeastern U.S., down into the into the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. This is Wednesday evening, stepping forward to Thursday. You can see this lead wave is ejecting a bit. This vortex that's centered over the northern Great Lakes brings some of the flow just a little bit off to the east, but still you've got decent mid-level flow out of the southwest across the southern plains for another day. You've got another subtle system upstream, but generally large-scale southwesterly flow in place at 500. And as we get closer to the events, you'll see these subtle jet streaks that will eject from this, locally increasing this severe weather threat on any given day. This is on Saturday, interestingly. It's got a little cutoff system that forms here in Texas. I don't know if I would buy that. GFS has been crazy. But this is the big system out here that is going to prolong the southwesterly flow across the southern plains, moving beyond this time period. Look at that. And this is the GFS too, so it's all over the place, seems like these days. It's probably going to eject a little bit further south than this. But boy, the latest GFS does try to expand the ridge over the central and eastern U.S., while the European brings that southwesterly flow over the plains. GFS does here around the 22nd, 23rd, 24th time frame. But you've got decent, strong southwesterly winds over the southern plains. Look at the Cape. Every day you're going to see this. You're going to see a bulging out Cape, a Cape pattern here with a dry line bulge, probably an east-west boundary located over portions of the southern plains. This is 300 hours out, but climatology should suggest that we're just going to see a pattern like that every single day. Friday looks like it's going to be a significant day on the European. You can see a barrage of southwesterly flow here, overspreading the dry line. And this flow is 30 to 40 knots, so even though it looks pretty weak at 500 millibars, they're still talking 30 swaths of 30 to 40 knots that are going to end up overspreading that dry line. Look at this southwest flow, just a mean trough here. A little bit of a split flow pattern, but really what you want to look at oh, look at that deep moisture here just sitting there to the east of the dry line over the southern plains. Every day you've just got this pool of moisture with decent flow above. This is on Saturday, May 16. Little waves coming through, and then here you can see the late May system that's going to be impacting the country around May 22nd, May 23rd type time period. There it comes. That's May 19 right there. But boy, it does look like quite a bit of a ridge dominates the central and eastern United States around May 20th. I do expect, though, this trough here to eventually break down this ridge, it looks like, by about the 22nd. And you start getting some decent southwesterly flow again over the Great Plains around May 22nd, May 23rd, May 24th. And then look at this big trough coming in to close out the month of May. So what it looks like to me in the long range, we're going to have dry line days Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then likely that ridge expands, covering much of the central and eastern U.S., and then another system gradually erodes it, and then it looks like another active pattern the last week of May through the early part of June, according to the European model here. Heading on over here to read some of the comments. Yeah, Ginger, it looks like Dixie Alley severe weather is coming to an end. It's a summertime ridge that really starts to take over the southern U.S., and we're shifting over to the Great Plains, central and southern plains now. That's right, Denise. Our weather here definitely impacts the UK. I actually studied abroad at Reading University back in 2000 to 2001. It was the only storm season I've ever missed. And a wall cloud, tornado-warned wall cloud went right over my place in Norman, Oklahoma. Stephanie, happy birthday. Tom, that's right. Our season is definitely about to start in the central southern plains. Dry line days, dry line supercells, easy chases, low stress chases. You just park there just to the east of the dry line and let it rip. Watch those motherships develop. Thanks, Raymond. I love explaining the models, and doing these briefings helps keep me disciplined too, to continue to break down the models and to not miss a day. I do wish that I was in the Western Texas Panhandle today, and I would be, except that I've got to pick up my new ride today. Abra, good luck blowing your windshield out. I think that you'll have a chance today in the Western Texas Panhandle, where that differential heating boundary merges up with the dry line, and you can always drop south along the dry line and pick off those supercells a little bit further south. Jen, I have chased fire weather, some wildfires. For AccuWeather especially, I had to go out to Redding, California and cover the car fire out there, and that was pretty intense. I never saw a massive firestorm though when I was out there. I could see it off in the distance in the hills and the mountains and smoldering areas, but I came a day later after that big firestorm and the fire NATO that happened there. I also covered the aftermath in Paradise, California from that fire. That was intense because the morning of, I was driving up to the fire through the fog and everything. I thought maybe it could have been smoke, but it was certainly scary. All the checkpoints weren't happening anymore. Looks like I'm having trouble with the live stream. Are you guys still seeing that? If that's the case, I will do another live briefing tomorrow morning. I hope that this one works so far. It says, sorry, we're having trouble playing this video. I think that some of these setups are almost similar to the El Reno Day 2013, those types of setups, and 2014, the Pilger, Southern South Dakota. Those are events where there was a west to east oriented differential heating boundary. You could call it an outflow boundary, but it basically becomes a stationary front. To the north of that stationary front, you get easterly winds at the low levels. It destabilizes to the north of that boundary. You get deeper moisture as well, almost like a pseudo high plains type of a forecast. But I think there's going to be a lot of instability, a dry line, and we're going to have to target those west to east oriented differential heating boundaries, those outflow boundaries. So we'll have to analyze those complexes of storms that develop in the middle of the night, and then the next day they often will produce. Wish I could get a haircut, but it's not going to be an option. See, I've got my Radar Omega hat on with a supercell on it. Feels appropriate. I think we've got a lot of storm chasing days ahead as we're moving into peak season. We chased Dixie Alley with a lot of effort, but I consider it kind of a low success rate this year, intercepting the tornadoes. We had a chance there on Easter Sunday to get really close to that EF2 tornado near Brooksville. But man, I just cannot seem to do very well in Dixie Alley ever since 2011, 2014 when we saw those up close tornadoes. 2014 was at night. But it's just difficult chasing down there. But chasing the dry line is pretty easy. You could chase it in a Segway. You just wait out there, watch the towers develop on the dry line, let them mature. They develop a wall cloud, tornado. Keep the vehicle pointed into the wind. In terms of science, Mark is still working on those infrasound sensors up in Canada. I'm hoping to deploy one of those in time for peak season. He'll have to ship it out to me. But he's been working on those nonstop so far this spring while he's been in quarantine. So I'm hoping to have one of the infrasound sensors out in the field. Don is also working on more of a crude weather station for the roof of the motorhome so that we can measure the data up close to the tornado. But thank you guys for joining me this morning for this live briefing. Again, my Wednesday target area is right here, with a little bit of lower confidence in the western Kansas portion of that target. Up there, that could be north of the outflow boundary. Less likelihood of full advection of moisture up there, but depending on the evolution of the overnight convection Tuesday night, that could extend all the way up into eastern Colorado as well. I think Tuesday is going to be a big day in the central and eastern Texas Panhandle. We'll likely see the Storm Prediction Center introduce probabilities there for Tuesday afternoon. And then this afternoon, let's watch down between to the southwest of Amarillo out near the New Mexico border. So thank you everybody for joining me today. Chase mode is about to be activated. I'm going to hit the road early tomorrow morning to head down to the Texas Panhandle. And it looks like I'll be on the road for the next month or so. And I'll continue to stream live, do daily briefings, and we'll just continue to break down the storm season one after another. I'm also going to try to work on the rocket paper and finish that while I'm in the RV and get that thing published. It's been almost a year since we collected that data, so I definitely got to get that paper out as well. But thank you everybody for joining me today, and never stop chasing and stay safe.